Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 116. Choice. Part 1. Bulge. Bulge. At that moment, the veins on Mok Jaehyun's left hand bulged prominently, and soon, the muscles up to his wrist swelled, and his skin turned black. Seeing this, the eyes of Lee Ji-young, the corpse Blood Valley master, widened. The phenomenon occurring in Mok Jaehyun's left wrist was almost identical to what had happened to Mok Yucheon's body during his rampage. The only difference was that it was limited to his wrist. No. What on earth? To the astonished Lee Ji-young, Mok Jaehyun spoke nonchalantly. It seems to put a lot of strain on the meridians, perhaps because I changed the location of the acupoints and detonated the internal energy. But if I apply it only to a part of the body without going berserk, it seems quite useful. What do you think? At this question, Lee Ji-young was at a loss for words. Was this even possible? If he had said that he had thoroughly examined Mok Yucheon's body, explored the circulation paths, and found a way to utilize it like this after numerous studies, it would have been understandable. But how did he do this? Why are you like that? Does it seem lacking in utility? That's... Oh my. What should he say? It wasn't a realm that could be understood with the thinking of an ordinary person. No, rather than that, it might be possible because Mok Jaehyun, or rather his liege possessing his body, was a deceased spirit. This seemed difficult for even martial artists with innate talent to replicate, let alone their martial prowess. Who could reproduce and utilize it like this just by observing it? Moreover, it was no different from the rampage of an evil technique. Perhaps his words about surpassing the wall within 3 years weren't empty. However, there was something Lee Ji-young didn't know. It was the fact that Mok Jaehyun accurately remembered the incorrect mnemonics he had taught Mok Yucheon from the beginning. If utilized well, it should be fine. Based on this, Mok Jaehyun had visually confirmed how Mok Yucheon's circulation paths and energy worked, which was why he could replicate it like this. Even Chang Ryan clicked her tongue in admiration of Mok Jaehyun's talent. This brat. How did he come up with the idea to make it his own like this? In her eyes, Mok Jaehyun's development speed and open-mindedness were not just surprising but also terrifying. Even with the ghost eyes of the deceased, this brat was truly a monster. It might not be an impossible feat. Perhaps fulfilling her grudge wasn't an entirely impossible task. Because of that, her emotions were further heightened. At that moment, Mok Jaehyun muttered while releasing his blackened hand to its original state. What should I call it? This was an evil technique that changed the locations of the acupoints. Considering that, since it's an evil technique that arbitrarily changes the acupoints, I should call it the reversed acupoint evil technique. Reversed acupoint evil technique. Thus, another potential emerged for Mok Jaehyun. For ordinary martial artists, it was a shortcut to delusion or becoming a cripple, but for Mok Jaehyun, who had a fast recovery speed, whether externally or internally, and originally possessed a reverse acupoint circulation method, it was no different from an exclusive potential that wouldn't put much strain on him if controlled well. Seeing this, Lee Ji-young, the corpse Blood Valley master, clicked his tongue and said, "My liege, you truly astound your subordinate a lot." Is that so? Mok Jaehyun chuckled and then asked. What happened to Mok Yucheon? Fortunately, the leaders intervened before a mishap occurred. At those words, Mok Jaehyun couldn't hide his disappointment. Since the surging energy had exceeded the level Mok Yucheon could handle, he had naturally thought that this time, he wouldn't be able to endure it and would become a cripple or die. But did he survive this time as well? At this point, Mok Yucheon also seemed to be lucky and have a long lifeline. It's a pity, but there's no other way. Thanks to that, he had to be satisfied with acquiring a new technique called the reversed acupoint evil technique. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Thus, the final duel of the last gate came to an end. However, a controversy arose here. It was about who the victor of this duel was. The first person to bring this up was none other than Thunderbolt Fist King 1 Byung-hak. Originally, after much deliberation, Li Jiyong, the Corpse Blood Valley Master, had intended to declare Ma Yuchion's defeat, as he had suffered severe internal injuries by recklessly employing an evil technique. However, I object. What do you mean by object? Although we intervened midway, if we look at it in terms of the duel, shouldn't Ma Yuchion's victory be acknowledged? At Wan Baiyonghak's objection, some of the other leaders showed signs of agreement. It was understandable because a duel ultimately meant a confrontation. However, if they hadn't intervened, Ma Jianan might have lost his life at the hands of the rampaging Ma Yuchion. Considering this, Ma Yuchion could be seen as the victor. Thunderbolt Fist King's words also have a point. Li Jiyong, who had intended to make the announcement, responded in that manner, perhaps conscious of the opinions surrounding him. At this, Wan Baiyonghak twitched the corners of his mouth. Although he had put forward a plausible justification, Wan Baiyonghak's true intentions were different. This way, I can slightly increase the chances of taking that child. If Ma Jianan became the victor of the duel, he would be the top ranker in the final gate, so the choice would lie with him, not the spectators. In that case, the probability would be 1/6, including Bright Blade King Sun Yun, Shadow Master, Valley Master Hang Yeoriang of the Summoning Sound Valley, Bo Hyukso, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon Clan, Dae Soman, the Grand Elder of the Scarlet Blood Clan, and himself. On the other hand, if Ma Jianan didn't become the top ranker, he would also be in a position to be chosen. Then it becomes a fight between the Bright Blade King and myself. Although it felt somewhat forced, if he pushed forward with his position here, how could the other leaders dare to drool over what he was aiming for? This was Thunderbolt Fist King Wan Baiyonghak's calculation. However, someone else raised an objection again. That remains to be seen. Huh? It was none other than Bright Blade King Sun Yun. At this, Wan Baiyonghak furrowed his brows. Since they held the same position, he had thought that Sun Yun would agree with him, as they were in similar situations. But what was this? What do you mean by that remains to be seen? If we look at it now, we can see that the injuries of the student named Ma Jianan are lighter than expected. As you esteemed masters know, in a life and death duel, superiority in power doesn't always determine the outcome. Huh. This wasn't a life and death duel. That applies even if it's a duel. The two once again showed a sharp confrontation. Seeing this, Li Jiyong, the Corpse Blood Valley Master, couldn't hide his perplexity. For now, he understood why they were behaving like this after Bright Blade King Sun Yun presented a dissenting opinion. Thunderbolt Fist King is trying to increase the chances of taking the Lord, even if only slightly, while Bright Blade King is trying to win favor by giving the Lord the top ranker position. His prediction was somewhat accurate. Bright Blade King Sun Yun believed that if Ma Jianan was a martial artist, he would choose not from all 6 leaders but from the strongest and most powerful ones among the 5 kings. At least that cunning fellow from the Yun Mock Sword Manor wouldn't do anything detrimental to himself. So there was no need to take away the top ranker position from him. Ahem. In any case, I maintain that the victor of this duel is the student named Ma Yuchion. Thunderbolt Fist King Wan Baiyonghak made his opinion clear. In response, Bright Blade King Sun Yun spoke as if he shared the same sentiment. Considering everything that student Ma Jianan demonstrated today, I believe he is sufficiently the victor. So this is how it's going to be? Wan Baiyonghak gnashed his teeth slightly. If it turned out like this, wouldn't he become the villain in Ma Jianan's eyes? He thought about changing his opinion right now. At that moment, someone stepped forward. I also agree with Thunderbolt Fist King's opinion. Valley Master of the Summoning Sound Valley? The one who stepped forward and agreed with his opinion was none other than Hang Yeoriang, the Valley Master of the Summoning Sound Valley. Looking at them, she said. Of course, it's clear that the student named Ma Jianan possesses exceptional martial talent, but if we consider the purpose of this duel, we should reach a conclusion in line with that purpose. Purpose? Bright Blade King Sun Yun raised one of his eyebrows. As expected from their adversarial relationship, the corners of Hang Yeoriang's mouth rose even more at this reaction. Yes, the purpose. Our sect recognizes evil techniques as martial arts. Even if he went berserk, the fact that the student named Mok Yucheon overwhelmed Mok Jiang-un for a moment doesn't change. Isn't that right? At her words, the two supreme leaders glanced at each other and nodded their heads. In fact, her words also had a point. He. Do you think this valley master will easily concede? Hang Yeoriang also coveted Mok Jiang-un. Therefore, from her perspective, she needed to guide the spectators to make the choice. Since she had already confirmed through voice transmission that Mok Jiang-un had no intention of choosing her, it was all the more necessary to solidify Mok Yucheon's victory. She had no intention of backing down from the chi battle with the two kings. Ahem. At this point, Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak, seemingly pleased with her agreement, tried to drive the point home. You see, most of the spectators share a similar opinion to mine. Although I personally evaluate that Mok Jiang-un child more highly in terms of talent, considering the purpose of the duel, naturally. Oh ho ho. I apologize, but may I also express my opinion? At the grating laughter, the gazes of everyone, including Won Byung-hak, turned towards Shadow Master. Shadow Master stood up modestly, covering his mouth with his palm. Then, he made a gesture of respect with both hands and spoke. First, I apologize for the interruption. Ahem. At his apology, Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak coughed as if displeased. It was undoubtedly because Shadow Master had interrupted his words and stepped forward, which meant he would surely express a dissenting opinion. At this, Shadow Master waved his hand lightly and said, "Did I offend you? I apologize. However, I stepped forward and interrupted because I thought it would be right to reach an accurate conclusion." An accurate conclusion? What do you mean by that? Won Byung-hak asked bluntly. If the Shadow Master said anything unreasonable, he was ready to confront him immediately. At this, Shadow Master politely opened his mouth. To be honest, in my case, I share the same opinion as Bright Blade King. No, how is that an accurate conclusion? Of course, it's not an accurate conclusion but merely my opinion. However, the fact that opinions are divided into two means that it's difficult to determine the victor of this duel with certainty. What do you mean it's difficult to determine the victor? Anyone can see that if we hadn't intervened in the duel. Yes, that's the problem. What? Won Byung-hak furrowed his brows. What on earth was Shadow Master talking about? As he was puzzled, Shadow Master continued speaking while bending his waist with his hands together. The duel had already returned to square one the moment we intervened. That's why this debate is taking place. Square one? Yes. If we hadn't intervened, a conclusion would have been reached in some way. That's something everyone agrees on, right? At his words, Won Byung-hak let out a soft sigh. Wasn't that obvious? However, if they hadn't intervened, Mok Jiang-un would have lost his life, and Mok Yucheon's meridians might have all ruptured, turning him into a cripple or leading to his death. They were able to save both of them because they had intervened in some way. Shadow Master. Your words certainly have a point, but if we hadn't intervened, a mishap would have occurred for both students. Do you not acknowledge that? I acknowledge it. That's why I believe we should choose one of two options rather than determining the outcome as a victory or defeat. Two options? Yes. At this, Valley Master Hang Yeoriang asked curiously. What are they? It's simple. Since the match was interrupted due to the spectators' intervention, either hold a rematch. Do you think a rematch is possible now? Hang Yeoriang frowned and gestured with her head towards the unconscious Mok Yucheon. Mok Yucheon's internal injuries were severe, so he wouldn't be able to fight for a while. How could they hold a rematch? At this, Shadow Master smiled and said, "Then, we have no choice but to declare it a draw due to the spectators' intervention." At those words, everyone fell silent. It was a conclusion completely different from what each of them had been thinking. However, it wasn't an entirely unreasonable argument. A draw. Nominally, that's correct. A rematch is difficult right away. We can't hold another spectating session at that time. Since opinions are divided, it might be better than that. Most of them showed signs of agreeing with Shadowmaster's words. There was no point in continuing to argue over who the victor was, as they would surely not back down from each other. However, there was another problem here. Shadowmaster's words also have a point. Since the match was interrupted, declaring it a draw is also an option. But then, how do we handle the top ranker position? This was everyone's concern. The reason opinions were divided over this outcome was because of whether the choice would be given to Mok Jaeyoung or to the spectators. At that moment, Lee Ji-young, the Corpse Blood Valley master, stepped forward. Then, how about doing it this way? Everyone's attention focused on him. There has never been a case where spectators intervened in a duel like this before. However, what everyone acknowledges is that it wouldn't be strange for either of these two to be the victor, right? Valley Master. Do you mean? Since it's difficult to hold a rematch in this situation, if the conclusion is a draw, we can't declare both students who remained until the end as losers, can we? Oh no. At these words, Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak's expression stiffened. In the end, he was suggesting that both students who had fought in the final duel of the last gate should be treated as top rankers. If this happened, the choice would be given to the two students, not the spectators. He wanted to object to this, but there were no more grounds for him to step forward. Phew. Stepping forward would only result in them holding on to each other. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Thus, for the first time in the history of the Corpse Blood Valley's gates, two top rankers were born. However, although he had contributed to the two of them becoming top rankers, Brightblade King Sun Yun was concerned about the repercussions if the fact that the two hostages brought from the righteous sect had jointly become top rankers became known to the entire sect. But he couldn't overturn the already determined result. It was a done deal, and the aftermath was a problem that the society leader, who had sent the hostages to the Corpse Blood Valley, had to bear. His concern was now only one thing. Mok Jaeyoung. He wanted to accept that person as his disciple. He agreed that probably everyone here shared the same opinion. Although they were joint top rankers, there wouldn't be many who wanted to accept Mok Yucheon, who had mastered an evil technique and had a high risk, as a disciple or subordinate. At that moment, Lee Ji-young, the Corpse Blood Valley master on the platform, spoke to Mok Jaeyoung, who was standing. Mok Jaeyoung, no, Mok Jaeyoung Danju and Mok Yucheon Danju, who have passed all the gates of the Corpse Blood Valley and become top rankers, I congratulate you. As mentioned earlier, as a benefit of becoming top rankers, the two clan leaders have been given the opportunity to choose from the leaders who have spectated here. The moment of choice had finally arrived. Who would he choose? Since the choice lay with Mok Jaeyoung, no matter how high-ranking the leaders were, most of them couldn't help but have eyes filled with tension and anticipation. At that moment, Mok Jaeyoung politely made a gesture of respect towards the leader sitting in front of the platform, raised his head, and spoke courteously. I apologize. All the leaders are such excellent individuals that it's difficult for me to conclude who to choose. What did he mean by that? As they were puzzled, Mok Jaeyoung smiled and said, So, I will speak frankly. No matter what, I want to go to the one who earnestly desires me. If there is such a person, it would be great if you could raise your right hand slightly. Swish. At Mok Jaeyoung's words, the leaders simultaneously raised their hands slightly, as if it didn't matter who was first. Coincidentally, it was all 6 leaders. They all glanced at each other, revealing an uncomfortable air. It was the expected result. Then, Mok Jaeyoung twitched his lips and said, This is quite a predicament. Everyone wants me. Then, there's no other way. For the sake of fairness, I will say this. Please don't be too angry. If I were to choose you, what benefits would there be? I would like each leader to tell me one by one. At Mok Jaeyoung's words, the 6 leaders simultaneously furrowed their brows. This was no different from telling those who wanted to take him to present a suitable price for him, wasn't it? Chapter 117. Choice. Part 2. Then, there's no other way. For the sake of fairness, I will say this. Please don't be too angry. If I were to choose you, what benefits would there be? I would like each leader to tell me one by one. At Mok Jayangun's words, the 6 leaders simultaneously furrowed their brows. This was no different from telling those who wanted to take him to present a suitable price for him, wasn't it? At this, Bo Hyukso, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan, couldn't hold back and opened his mouth. How impudent. If you think the benefit of becoming the top ranker is some great privilege, you are gravely mistaken. At those words, the other leaders also slightly nodded their heads, indicating their agreement to some extent. Although everyone coveted him as a disciple due to his innate martial talent, those present here were leaders who guided the Heaven and Earth Society. What kind of audacity was this, treating them like an auction, not even an auction house? As they were doing so, Mok Jayangun politely made a gesture of respect to Grand Elder Bo Hyukso. Swish. He's not slow-witted. At this, Bo Hyukso chuckled and was about to nod his head when. Yes, I will keep your words in mind. Then, do the other leaders have nothing to say? What? In an instant, the expression of Bo Hyukso, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan, distorted. He had almost blatantly told him not to be impudent towards the leaders and to show respect, but was this fellow now mocking him? Unable to contain his anger, Bo Hyukso tried to rise from his seat. How dare you? Ah. Calm down. Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan. Grand Elder of the Scarlet Blood clan? Dae Soman, the Grand Elder of the Scarlet Blood clan sitting next to him, stopped him. Now, calm down. He's still a junior who hasn't even reached adulthood, and he passed the gates of the Corpse Blood Valley as the top ranker. Should we, as his seniors, reprimand him for showing that level of boldness? Let's show leniency on this auspicious day. Is this guy serious? At his words, the right eyebrow of Bo Hyukso, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan, rose. He was stopping him with nice words, but wasn't he blatantly trying to give a good impression to that impudent fellow? So he was about to say something to him when. You wanted to hear what advantages there are? All right. I'll speak first. If you follow me, I'll grant you the position of Vice Clan Leader in the Scarlet Blood Clan and pass down my exclusive martial art, the Scarlet Blood Mysterious Ancestral Technique. With your excellent martial talent, you'll be able to inherit my position in no time. At the words of Dae Soman, the Grand Elder of the Scarlet Blood Clan, Bo Hyukso, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan, clicked his tongue. If it turned out like this, wouldn't it go according to that impudent fellow's wishes? It was truly perplexing. Bo Hyukso looked at the other leaders with an expression asking if this was all right. Although he couldn't say much to Grand Elder Dae Soman since they held the same position, if the higher-ups drew a strong line at a time like this. You can sufficiently imagine what benefits there would be if you become this Valley Master's disciple, so I'll only say this. This Valley Master is the only one here who can teach you the sword. Oh no. When Valley Master Hang Yeoriang stepped forward, Bo Hyukso, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan, bit his lip hard. He had hoped for them to draw a line, but instead, even a leader of the Valley Master's rank had stepped forward. With this, he lost the grounds to say anything to the fellow. If he were to say something, it would be criticizing her, who held a higher position. Damn it. Maybe he should have pretended to be unable to resist and spoken up as well. But if he stepped forward now, it would only make him feel embarrassed because of what he had said earlier. Moreover, for those like him who could be considered the lowest-ranking leaders here, the Grand Elders, it was an unfavorable bidding. But will Shadow Master and the 2 kings go this far to take that kid? They had their pride, after all. As he was thinking that, someone spoke up. The sword. Is that the path you wish to pursue? The one who asked this question was none other than Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak. Seeing even him step forward, Bo Hyukso, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan, slid his buttocks into the inner side of the chair he was half sitting on. With even Thunderbolt Fist King stepping forward, taking this child was already a lost cause. If you have chosen the sword as your path, I will naturally give up, but with your innate martial talent, you can pursue the path of a grandmaster in any martial art, not just the sword. Grandmaster? Grandmaster. It refers to becoming a master in any field. In the martial world, grandmasters are those who have surpassed the wall and reached the realm of unrestrained realm, and they are called grandmasters. Seeing Thunderbolt Fist King evaluate Mok Jiangun so highly, everyone clicked their tongues inwardly. His determination to take him seemed incredibly strong. Is the sword the path you have chosen? At one Byung Hak's question, everyone looked at Mok Jiangun. Eventually, Mok Jiangun opened his mouth. It doesn't have to be the sword. My goal is to become strong, regardless of the path. At those words, Valley Master Hang Yeoriang's eyes turned fierce. She had said that she would teach him the sword, so him saying that was no different from drawing a clear line. She wanted him, but he truly knew how to provoke her. At that moment, one Byung Hak burst into hearty laughter at Mok Jiangun's words. Ha ha ha. As expected, your aspirations align well with your talent, which is great. He was very satisfied with Mok Jiangun's response to his question. If Mok Jiangun had no intention of choosing him and was going to choose Valley Master Hang Yeoriang, he would have drawn a clear line in response to this question. However, Mok Jiangun didn't do that. If so, it probably meant that he was inclined towards him, who held the position of a king. One Byung Hak spoke to Bright Blade King Sun Yun beside him with a triumphant expression. Brother Sun, you also wanted him, but it seems I will be the one taking him. At those words, Sun Yun snorted. Regardless, one Byung Hak seemed confident that Mok Jiangun would come to him, so he stood up from his seat and spoke, wanting to drive the point home. If you become my disciple, not only will you be my successor, but I will also pass down my lifelong martial arts to you. If you complete the true origin lightning fist of our sect, no one will be able to stand against you with the Thunderstrike fist. It could be heard as an arrogant promise, depending on how one listened to it. However, since he had drawn a line earlier regarding the Thunderstrike fist, no one said anything. They took it as him earnestly desiring Mok Jiangun, come to me as my disciple. One Byung Hak extended his hand towards Mok Jiangun. It was at that very moment. Truly remarkable, child of the Mok family. As expected, Bright Blade King Sun Yun, who was beside Thunderbolt Fist King One Byung Hak, finally stepped forward. At this, One Byung Hak shook his head as if displeased. As if not caring about this at all, Bright Blade King Sun Yun spoke to Mok Jiangun, our connection runs deep, you and I. Connection? At those words, everyone, including one Byung Hak, looked at Bright Blade King Sun Yun with puzzled expressions. What did he mean by saying their connection was deep? Could it be that they already knew each other? As they were thinking that, Mok Jiangun opened his mouth while making a gesture of respect with both hands. Thanks to Bright Blade King, I was able to come here, but I didn't expect to see you again in this place. Oh no. At those words, one Byung Hak furrowed his brows. Did they really know each other? But why didn't they show any signs of it until just now? Was it intentional? To make him harbor false hopes and then feel deprived? If that was the case, he couldn't help but feel quite displeased. As he was doing so, Bright Blade King Sun Yun continued speaking. Remarkable. Even then, I thought your talent was outstanding, but I never imagined you would survive here. Should I say it was a good experience, thanks to you? At those words, a glimmer of admiration appeared in Sun Yun's eyes. He had thought that Mok Jiangun might resent him for making him suffer in the Corpse Blood Valley, but surprisingly, he spoke about it so calmly, which was unexpected. In fact, there was no trace of resentment in his eyes. Not bad. He had thought Mok Jiangun was just cunning, but seeing him show such composure, he took a liking to him. With that, he wanted to confirm one thing. There's something I want to ask you. Something you want to ask? That's right. Please, ask away. If given the opportunity, Do you have the desire to return? At that question, everyone couldn't hide their puzzlement. What did he mean by that? It was difficult to understand the meaning behind this question. However, not everyone was like that. Is that so? Oh ho ho. Shadow Master, who knew the fact that Mok Jayanun's origin was as a hostage from the Yun Mok Sword Manor of the Righteous Sect, understood the gist of the question and nodded his head. Indeed, this was an important question. He was also interested in Mok Jayanun, but since his roots lay in the Righteous Sect, he wanted to confirm this. If Mok Jayanun had intentions towards the Righteous Sect, accepting him as a disciple would be a futile act. At that moment, Mok Jayanun opened his mouth. I don't particularly place significance on returning. Besides, I came here of my own accord. As soon as those words were spoken, the corners of Bright Blade King Sun Yun's mouth rose. He had heard the answer he most wanted to hear. With that, Sun Yun stood up from his seat and spoke. Not only do you possess martial talent, but you have also become a suitable talent for our sect. All right. Become my disciple. If you do so, even if your background becomes an issue in the future, I will protect you until the end. You know what this means. At those words, the other leaders murmured softly. What did he mean by background? Come to think of it, they were curious about which sect these siblings, who had jointly become top rankers in this corpse Blood Valley's gates, belonged to. At this, Valley Master Hang Yeoriang opened her mouth. What do you mean by background? What did you just say? It's exactly as you heard. Exactly? So, Bright Blade King, you're saying you know that child's background, and it's something that could be problematic? At this question, Li Jiyong, the corpse Blood Valley Master on the platform, showed a perplexed expression. Although his liege was possessing him, that Shell could be considered the son of the Yun Mok Sword Manor of the Righteous Sect. If his identity were to be revealed, the repercussions would be quite significant. Was it intentional? Li Jiyong looked at Bright Blade King Sun Yun. He had cleverly revealed Mok Jayanun's identity without explicitly stating it, creating a sense of crisis. He wasn't talking about the benefits but rather emphasizing the potential losses, persuading that only he could protect Mok Jayanun. With this, he has no choice but to be taken away. It seemed that his lord's position had become difficult. Bright Blade King Sun Yun was a relentless person, and he had many disciples under him, so he didn't particularly want to recommend him. However, if he came out like this, his lord currently had few allies and couldn't afford to make enemies, so he might have no choice but to take Bright Blade King's hand. You're quite the strategist, Bright Blade King. Shadow Master covered his mouth with his hand and smiled. At first glance, it might sound like Bright Blade King Sun Yun was saying he would protect Mok Jayanun if he became his disciple, but this was literally a warning. Don't forget your situation. That offer was a strategy to make the other party submit mentally. The moment Mok Jayanun's identity as a son of the Righteous Sect was revealed, he would find himself in a difficult situation. There's no other choice. If he were Mok Jayanun, he would have no choice but to choose Bright Blade King Sun Yun. That was the only way to obtain a relatively safe haven. Bright Blade King Sun Yun was a person with a clear stance and stubbornness, so he would definitely keep his word. To overcome the weakness of his background, the best option was him. At that moment, Mok Jayanun opened his mouth. Ah, that could indeed be a problem. That's right. If he knew that, there was only one choice. Even if his identity wasn't revealed now because he was attached to the sect, if it became known due to the society leader's whim, would others become a protective haven for him like Sun Yun? They wouldn't be willing to take on such a risk. Come. Take my hand. However. Then, I should make it clear here. Make it clear? What do you? Since this might hold me back, I thought it would be better to tell you in advance. At those words, Bright Blade King Sun Yun's eyes wavered. What was this child trying to do now? With that? Wait. Stop. Bright Blade King Sun Yun tried to stop Mok Jayanun. However. Bam. Mok Jayangan made a gesture of respect with both hands together and spoke in a loud voice. Let me introduce myself again. I am Mok Jayangan, the third son of the Yun Mok Sword Manor of the Righteous Sect. As soon as those words were spoken, not only the leaders but also the warriors of the Corpse Blood Valley who were unaware of the truth, and even the students, all became agitated. This was something no one had anticipated. The final top ranker of the Corpse Blood Valley's gates, which had produced the best disciples of the later generations in the Heaven and Earth Society for a long time, was from the renowned martial family of the Righteous Sect, the Yun Mok Sword Manor. But how did he end up participating in the Corpse Blood Valley's gates here? As they were doing so, Mok Jayangan smiled and said, "But let me add one more thing. I was brought here as a hostage by Bright Blade King, who is present here." In an instant, Bright Blade King Sun Yun was dumbfounded. He revealed this fatal weakness and potential gossip with his own mouth. Chapter 118. Choice. Part 3. But let me add one more thing. I was brought here as a hostage by Bright Blade King, who is present here. In that instant, Bright Blade King Sun Yun's expression stiffened. Publicly revealing this critical weakness that could become a source of gossip? Just what was he thinking? Even if it was outside the fortress, this place was still within the territory of the Heaven and Earth Society, and everyone here belonged to the Heaven and Earth Society. To reveal this inside the Heaven and Earth Society, whose internal factions had long vied for dominance in the martial world with the Righteous faction, to the point where calling them mortal enemies would be no exaggeration, was truly a foolish choice. Murmur murmur. He's from the Righteous faction? The Righteous faction? The atmosphere quickly heated up as murmurs arose from all around. It was the same for the other trainees. Mok Jayangan's forcibly sworn followers, Mujang Yak and Demon Fire Hall's Mo Harang, couldn't hide their shock either, glaring at him with dumbfounded expressions. At the very least, they had thought Mok Jayangan was from a small or medium-sized faction under the Heaven and Earth Society, even if he was a nameless one. But the Righteous faction? Then, I've sworn loyalty to someone from the Righteous faction? How could this be? The two individuals' faces were instantly colored with humiliation. Oh ho ho. What a vexing child. Knowing his true identity, a man who was one of the few, the Shadow Master, clicked his tongue inwardly while looking at Mok Jayangan. Right now, Mok Jayangan had practically revealed his identity in the middle of enemy territory. Even if he was here as a hostage. To the Heaven and Earth Society martial artists, those from the Righteous faction must be rejected as enemies. This was true for everyone, regardless of age or gender. Especially for the younger generation of promising talents, as they had been educated by their parents and teachers from a young age, the animosity was passed down even more strongly. It wouldn't be surprising if a commotion broke out at any moment. Thud. The Yun Mok Sword Manor? Did you just say the Righteous faction's Yun Mok Sword Manor? As expected, someone jumped up from their seat. It was the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan, Bo Hyukso. Having lost his father in the battle against the Wasan faction, his hatred for the Righteous faction ran deep. But when Mok Jayangan's identity was revealed to be none other than a member of the Righteous faction, he reacted intensely. How could a mere Righteous faction underling enter the Corpse Blood Valley, which can be called the gateway to the great Heaven and Earth Society? Kneel. Whoosh. Bo Hyukso shattered the armrest of his chair with a single strike. Then, imbuing the shattered, pointed piece of the armrest with his internal energy, he hurled it towards Mok Jayangan's thigh. It was at a tremendous speed. However, Mok Jayangan calmly unleashed his footwork, stepping back and evading it. Crack! The armrest piece pierced the stone floor of the plaza right in front of Mok Jayangan, embedding halfway. It seemed he had intended to impale Mok Jayangan's leg with this. Dodged it? Good. Then, I, the Flame Demon Grand Elder, will personally make you kneel. The Flame Demon clan's Grand Elder, Bo Hyukso, was about to stomp his foot and step forward. At that moment, someone blocked his way. Grand Elder of the Flame Demon clan. Stop. It was none other than the Corpse Blood Valley Master, Li Jiyong. As Li Jiyong blocked his path, Bo Hyukso raised his voice with a flushed face. Valley Master. What in the world is the meaning of this? How can a mere righteous faction underling be here? Surely you couldn't have been unaware, right? At this question, Li Jiyong couldn't hide his tremendous discomfort. Because the one possessing the body was from a renowned righteous faction family, he thought he wouldn't carelessly reveal the identity of his vessel. But he didn't expect him to suddenly make it public like this. This is troublesome. The problem wasn't just that he revealed it, but also that the society leader had ordered to keep the identities of the two Mok brothers, who were brought here as hostages, a secret. It was a direct order from the society leader, so it had to be followed. If he were to disregard it in the middle of all this attention, the society leader would certainly use it as an excuse to pressure him. Should I remain silent? However, for the sake of his liege, this had to be revealed. That was the duty of a subordinate. With this, Li Jiyong was about to reveal that it was an order from the society leader and that there had been instructions to keep it a secret. This is... Before he could finish his words, inserting the Yun Mok Sword Manor's hostages into the Corpse Blood Valley entrance was an order from above. So, don't raise any more objections. Grand Elder of the Flame Demon Clan. Isn't that right, Bright Blade King? The one who stepped forward before Li Jiyong could speak was none other than the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun. Seeing Sun Yun take action, Mok Jiangun's eyes glinted with interest. He had expected Sun Yun to show anger after he willingly exposed his own weakness, which Sun Yun had intended to use against him. Instead, he was unexpectedly trying to resolve the situation. An order from above, what do you mean by? I advise against discussing this matter further. At Sun Yun's warning, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon Clan, Bo Hyukso, closed his mouth. If it was an order from the upper echelons above the Five Kings, then it was beyond the line where he could step in and argue. I understand. As Sun Yun responded and sat back down, the Corpse Blood Valley Master, Li Jiyong, let out a sigh of relief and sent a grateful look towards the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun. Thanks to Sun Yun stepping in first, saying it was an order from above, the difficult situation was resolved. However, despite his lord's unexpected actions, seeing him step in to resolve the matter like this showed that he truly wanted to accept him as his disciple. Even if there might be dissatisfaction arising from accepting a hostage from the righteous faction as a disciple, he was willing to take on that risk, which was indeed remarkable. Well, if he hadn't known that his liege was residing in that body, he himself would have been tempted to take him as a disciple. But right then, I find it hard to accept. The owner of the displeased voice was none other than Hang Yoriang, the Summoning Sound Valley Master. Just a moment ago, she had been desperate to have Mok Jiangun, but now she was glaring at him with eyes full of hostility. Sun Yun spoke to her. What is it that you find hard to accept? Even if it was an unavoidable order from above, if we hadn't known about this fact, one of us would have almost accepted a hostage from the righteous faction as a disciple, wouldn't we? At her words, the two Grand Elders nodded in agreement. Even if it was an order from above, he was still a hostage from the righteous faction. If they had unknowingly accepted someone detestable from the righteous faction as a disciple, wouldn't they have had to bear the consequences later on? The Summoning Sound Valley Master has a point. Brother Yun and the Corpse Blood Valley Master, why didn't you give us even a hint despite knowing this? Thunderbolt Fist King, One Byong Hak, also expressed his dissatisfaction. Judging by the change in his way of speaking, it seemed he had also developed reservations about Mok Jiangun after learning about his background. This was, in a way, a natural reaction. At that moment, the Summoning Sound Valley Master, Hang Yoriang, smiled bitterly and said, Ah. Now I understand. Now you understand? Yes. If it was an order from above to send the righteous factions hostage to Corpse Blood Valley, then perhaps the original purpose was something else, wasn't it? We all know well what kind of place Corpse Blood Valley is. At her words, the others showed gazes of agreement. Corpse Blood Valley was a place from which it was difficult to come out alive once you entered. Sending the righteous factions hostage to such a place was closer to implying that they didn't want him to survive, rather than giving him a chance. Perhaps those above also intended for that, but things didn't go as expected? Don't cross the line. Summoning Sound Valley Master. The Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, warned her in a sharp voice as she continued to express her dissatisfaction despite it being an order from above. Then, Heng Yiuriang laughed and bowed slightly with her hands clasped in front of her waist. Yes, yes. How could I, a lowly one, dare to disobey those above? However, I have no desire to accept a righteous faction member who killed my sister and can be called our sect's eternal enemy as a disciple or subordinate. So. Screech. The Summoning Sound Valley Master, Heng Yiuriang, turned her chair around and sat down. Her action seemed to be a protest of her own dissatisfaction. But that wasn't the end of it. Screech. As if agreeing with her, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon Clan, Bo Hyukso, and the Grand Elder of the Crimson Blood Clan, Dae Soman, also turned their chairs around. However, they weren't the only ones. Screech. Thunderbolt Fist King. Even Thunderbolt Fist King, One Byung Hak, turned his chair around. Their actions appeared to show their firm resolve to reject anyone from the righteous faction, even if it was an order from above. Considering their future standing within the sect, their behavior was understandable. Ahem, ahem. Mok Yucheon, who was coughing as quietly as possible. Fortunately, he had woken up just a moment ago, and the heavy atmosphere made his thoughts complex. They're the same too. It wasn't just the righteous faction. The martial artists of the evil factions and the Heaven and Earth Society also hated the righteous faction. Well, it might be natural. Haven't they rejected each other and fought and killed each other for a long time? Similar. Perhaps that was why his heart felt heavy, and on the other hand, there was understanding. No. I understand them? Why did he have such thoughts? Mok Yucheon inwardly denied his own thoughts. Then, he looked at Mok Jaehyun. That guy was unexpected. He didn't think he would reveal his identity so boldly. Still, his roots are in the righteous faction after all. He was truly hard to understand, even when you thought you knew him. How much disappointment had he received because of that guy? He had thought he was a demon who belonged here, not in the righteous faction. But if that guy was going to uphold his honor as a member of the righteous faction and as a martial artist of the Yun Mok Sword Matter until the end, the story would be different. If he does so, I will also risk my life to help. Right then. Mok Jaehyun shouted in a loud voice that everyone could hear. I, Mok Jaehyun, was born as a member of the righteous faction, but as I grew up, I despised their hypocrisy and rotten ways, as if anything other than the righteous path was evil, following a black and white logic. In an instant, Mok Yucheon was dumbfounded. What did this guy just say? Until just a moment ago, after waking up and hearing what Mok Jaehyun said, he thought he had misunderstood this guy. But now he was insulting the righteous faction. Murmur murmur. Everyone's attention was once again focused on Mok Jaehyun. As if not caring about their gazes, Mok Jaehyun continued his shout. Because of that, from a young age, I have admired the heroes of the Heaven and Earth Society. The reason I have revealed my identity to the esteemed heroes of the Heaven and Earth Society is to bid farewell to my past self. This guy, could it be? At his words, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, frowned. He knew what this cunning fellow was trying to do. And just as he suspected, Mok Jaehyun bowed his head to everyone with a fist and palm salute and shouted. I vow to the gods of heaven and earth. I, Mok Jaehyun, will sever my ties with my family, the Yun Mok Sword Matter, and furthermore, the righteous faction. And I will become a member of the Heaven and Earth Society and fight against those detestable people. His voice resounded through the plaza. At this, the plaza was once again in an uproar. When he had revealed his identity, they couldn't hide their outrage at the fact that someone from the righteous faction was in Corpse Blood Valley, but who would have thought he would suddenly make a declaration of defection? The Shadow Master covered his mouth and laughed softly. I wondered what he was trying to do by willingly revealing his weakness, but he's defecting, huh? Even he didn't expect this. He was the son of a renowned martial family of the righteous faction, the Yun Moksword Matter, and his talent was outstanding. Usually, such individuals have strong beliefs and never yield, but this guy was a completely different type of person. What an interesting child. The Shadow Master's eyes narrowed as he looked at Mok Jayangan. It didn't feel like he was defecting just to get through this moment and save his life. Then, what kind of thoughts did he have? This child, he must have something. He became curious about what it was. At that moment, Mok Jayangan spoke in a voice that only the executives could hear. Now there shouldn't be any issues with my background, right? At these words, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, who had been staring at him with an astonished expression, suddenly burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. In all his life, this was truly the first time he had seen such a fellow. He had intended to accept him as a disciple and tame him well to make him abandon the righteous faction and become a talent of the Heaven and Earth Society. But he came on his own. No, he declared his entry with his own mouth. He had thought he was reckless even in the Yun Moksword Matter, but he was really an unpredictable fellow. Sun Yun looked at the executives behind him and said, "It would be difficult to argue about his background now." At his words, the executives who had turned their chairs couldn't give any response. They had already shown their will to reject him based on his background, so if they changed their attitude now because of his declaration of defection, how unsightly would that be? Seeing their reactions, Sun Yun thought it was rather fortunate. In the end, he'll come to my side. He had shown his unwavering support for Mok Jayangan until the end. If that guy had even a bit of gratitude and felt their hostility, he would have realized that there was only one choice in the end. Sun Yun was about to extend his hand towards Mok Jayangan and open his mouth. At that moment, oh ho ho. Is it my turn to make a bid now? At the unique, grating voice, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, frowned and turned his head. The one who, along with him, was the only person who hadn't turned his chair. It was none other than the Shadow Master. Ah. That's right, he was still there. But there was no particular worry. The only one who could pose a challenge was the Thunderbolt Fist King, One Byung Hak, but he had kicked away the fortune that came to him on its own. While that was happening, the Shadow Master said to Mok Jayangan, "Well, I don't think you'd be drawn to me teaching you Taoist techniques since I've cultivated the Tao. And talking about the advantages of my position would be nothing compared to His Excellency, the Bright Blade King, so I suppose this would be the only thing that might entice you." This? What was he trying to lure Mok Jayangan with? As he wondered, the Shadow Master smiled and said, "I see you've trained in the sword, but it doesn't seem like you have a suitable famous sword. Am I right?" That's true, but dash. He didn't particularly have a desire for famous swords. He didn't even know much about famous swords. That's great. A swordsman should have a famous sword befitting him. Sun Yun's eyes narrowed. What kind of famous sword did he have that he was saying such things? But the next words that came out of the Shadow Master's mouth suddenly stirred up the surroundings. "If you agree to join me, I will give you one of the legendary demon swords, the Evil Commandment Sword." Murmur murmur,